For weeks, speculation swirled behind palace gates. What was happening to Prince Louis? Why had the youngest royal vanished from the public eye? But now, just 3 minutes ago, King Charles has shattered the silence with a shocking, somber announcement that's sending waves across the world. The truth isn't just heartbreaking, it unravels a deeper royal crisis that no one saw coming. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It started quietly. Too quietly. Royal calendars were updated without explanation. Public appearances went on without the familiar flash of a young prince's smile. At first, palace aides dismissed it as routine, a child resting, they said. But as days turned into weeks, the absence became impossible to ignore. Something was wrong, and everyone could feel it. Social media filled the silence the palace refused to address. Every blurred photo, every cancelled engagement, every unanswered question fueled darker theories. Was it a health scare? A hidden accident? Or something the monarchy was desperately trying to keep buried? The longer the palace stayed quiet, the louder the whispers became. Then came the moment no one was prepared for. King Charles stepped forward, not with confidence, but with visible weight on his shoulders. His words were slow, measured, and heavy with emotion. This was not the polished voice of a monarch delivering rehearsed reassurance. This was a grandfather struggling to speak. "This is not just about a young boy," he said, his voice faltering. "It's about everything we've failed to protect." In that single sentence changed everything, because in that moment, it became clear this was not a passing concern or a minor setback. Charles wasn't speaking about schedules or privacy. He was speaking about responsibility, about regret, about a truth that had been ignored for far too long. Sources close to the palace described the atmosphere as suffocating. Senior aides reportedly lowered their eyes as the statement was delivered, fully aware that this silence had not been accidental. It had been deliberate, carefully calculated, and now painfully exposed. Behind closed doors, questions had been raised long before the public noticed Louis's absence. Subtle signs, early warnings, concerns that were softened, delayed, or pushed aside in favor of maintaining normalcy. The crown moved forward, while something fragile was left behind. Catherine and William's role has also come under intense scrutiny. Why wait this long? Why endure the rumors, the pressure, the cruel speculation? Insiders suggest the decision to stay silent was not made lightly. It was a choice driven by fear of exposure, fear of consequences, fear of what acknowledging the truth might unleash. And now, with Charles finally breaking his silence, the illusion of calm has collapsed. The palace is no longer controlling the narrative. The truth is pressing outward, demanding to be heard. But as the king's voice breaks, the real story begins to unravel. Because this isn't just about illness, it's about betrayal buried beneath palace marble. Before the world knew something was wrong, the palace staff did. Late-night doctor visits, hushed arguments in Kensington's East Wing, and a nursery that grew quieter by the day. Prince Louis's childhood had already been marked by eerie whispers, and now we know why. Even in a household accustomed to discretion, something about the energy in Louis's wing had changed. Staff who once joked about the youngest royal's charm now walked on eggshells. Aides exchanged glances, maids paused longer outside his door, and footmen often returned from that hallway pale and tight-lipped. It wasn't illness in the traditional sense, it was confusion and fear of what might be discovered. While the public saw smiling family portraits, behind closed doors, Catherine had already begun quietly hiring medical professionals, specialists, not listed on the official royal payroll. These weren't mere wellness checks, they were intense developmental evaluations, conducted with utmost secrecy, away from palace clinics and outside the eyes of traditional advisors. Catherine, usually so composed, had grown visibly worn. Her days were split between royal duties and emotionally draining consultations with pediatric neurologists. She refused to let the media get wind of it, not out of shame, but fear of misunderstanding. The turning point came during an afternoon play session. One of the aides rushed to Catherine, breathless, reporting that Louis had collapsed without warning. There was no apparent cause, No bruising, no visible injury, just a sudden stillness that shook everyone present. The panic that followed was immediate. A medical team was summoned, and Louis was revived. But something had clearly changed in that moment. Catherine, shaken to her core, called William. The couple left a state event within the hour, and for the next 2 weeks, they retreated from public life entirely. But not everyone in the family was informed. Grandfather Charles, deeply involved in diplomatic briefings and public appearances, was kept in the dark by Catherine's choice. Not out of cruelty, but protection. She needed time. Camilla, however, was incensed. Her repeated inquiries about Louis's whereabouts were met with vague replies, and she reportedly accused Catherine of being needlessly dramatic. This tension added another layer to an already strained family dynamic. Meanwhile, palace officials activated what's known internally as the Royal Privacy Clause, a rarely invoked protocol that blocks media outlets from reporting on specific health inquiries of senior or high-profile minors. Any leaks would be met with aggressive legal action. This clause hadn't been used in over 2 decades, but its sudden enforcement sent a clear message. Something was wrong, and the firm wasn't going to let the outside world see it. Yet, that only stirred more suspicion. The more silence the palace maintained, the louder the whispers outside grew. As royal doctors scramble for answers, what they discover leads to a series of explosive confrontations inside the palace. When King Charles tried to unite the family in the face of crisis, Camilla had other plans. What began as concern soon turned into conflict, as Camilla's growing influence twisted the narrative around Prince Louis's condition, and Catherine was not having it. At first, Camilla's involvement seemed well-intentioned. She extended sympathies, inquired about Louis's progress, and even proposed a quiet family gathering to support William and Catherine. But behind the scenes, her tone shifted quickly. At a private luncheon with senior aides, Camilla dismissed the growing health concerns as media hysteria, claiming the press was feeding off silence and paranoia. Her exact words, "This is just another overblown royal flu," were leaked days later and sent shockwaves through palace circles. Catherine, already emotionally drained, felt deeply betrayed. It only got worse from there. When Louis was excused from attending a major royal charity event due to a health precaution, Camilla reportedly went ahead and invited select press members to attend anyway. Cameras were granted extended access, coverage was expanded, and Camilla took center stage with her grandchildren smiling, waving, and speaking about the strong future of the monarchy. For Catherine, this was the final straw. She interpreted it not just as insensitivity, but a deliberate act to shift public focus away from Louis and toward Camilla's own lineage. Behind closed doors, the tension boiled over into a rare and explosive confrontation. Princess Anne, fiercely loyal to Catherine and deeply disturbed by the unfolding drama, confronted Camilla in private. What began as a stern conversation escalated quickly. Anne accused Camilla of exploiting a vulnerable child to consolidate her public image, to which Camilla allegedly fired back that no one was helping the crown by hiding behind a sick child. The room went cold. That line would echo through the palace corridors for days. Charles, torn between loyalty and leadership, attempted to mediate, but Camilla was unrelenting. She insisted that Catherine's grip on media narratives had become dangerous, claiming it was stoking fear and driving division within the family. She urged Charles to impose stricter controls on what could be shared with the public and suggested replacing key media liaisons under Catherine's discretion. Charles hesitated, but the damage was already done. Behind the scenes, Camilla had also begun lobbying for more attention on her grandchildren. A series of press releases subtly shifted the royal spotlight toward the Parker Bowles side of the family. Features were written, images shared, and even educational engagements staged to raise their profile. It was strategic, calculated, and completely out of touch with the emotional weight of what Catherine and William were enduring. For William, the breaking point came during a late-night strategy meeting with senior advisors. In a moment of frustration and grief, he turned to his father and declared Camilla's actions as nothing less than cold indifference. He accused her of using the palace crisis as a platform to rewrite legacy lines. It was raw, it was personal, and it marked a moment of reckoning between Charles's current wife and his future king. But it wasn't just Camilla's manipulation that tore the family apart soon. Another royal would make a devastating move no one expected. In the midst of Prince Louis's silent suffering, Prince Harry chose to go public with the one secret Catherine feared would ever surface. In a rare interview, he didn't just speak of family dysfunction, he named names, and what he said left King Charles reeling. The timing alone felt cruel. As the palace struggled to contain rising concern over Louis, Harry's words detonated like a controlled explosion. Precise and deeply personal. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if every sentence had been rehearsed in his mind for years. This wasn't a moment of impulsive anger. It was calculated truth, or at least his version of it. Harry suggested that Prince Louis had been doomed from the start, not by fate, but by the internal machinery of the monarchy itself. He spoke of patterns, of traditions that prize image over intervention, of warnings ignored because acknowledging them would mean confronting uncomfortable truths about the royal bloodline. His implication was devastating. This wasn't an accident. It was neglect wrapped in protocol. Then came the line that froze the nation. Harry claimed King Charles had been made aware, years earlier, of a hereditary issue affecting certain branches of the family. A risk. A possibility. Something discussed quietly and then shelved. According to Harry, the crown chose continuity over caution, reputation over responsibility. Charles, he implied, knew and chose silence. Meghan didn't stay quiet for long. Within hours, she echoed Harry's claims, accusing the firm of concealing sensitive genetic evaluations for the sake of public stability. She framed it not as a royal failing, but an institutional one. "They protect the crown," she said, "even when it costs a child." The words spread rapidly, igniting outrage and disbelief in equal measure. Inside the palace, Catherine collapsed under the weight of it all. The interview played once, then again. Each replay cut deeper. She felt exposed, betrayed, and blindsided by someone she once trusted. This wasn't concern. This was public warfare. In private, Catherine reportedly broke down. Her anger fueled not just by the accusations, but by the timing. Louis was still fragile, still vulnerable. And now, his pain had become global spectacle. William acted swiftly. He reached out to Harry, bypassing aides and protocol. The brothers agreed to meet privately, hoping perhaps foolishly for clarity. What followed was anything but reconciliation. Accusations flew, old wounds reopened. Harry stood by his claims. William defended his family. The meeting ended without resolution, only hardened lines and irreversible damage. Through it all, King Charles said nothing. No rebuttal, no clarification, no denial. His silence during the storm became louder than any statement he could have issued. Insiders whispered that advisors urged him to respond, but Charles hesitated. Whether out of guilt, fear, or calculation, no one could say. But the absence of his voice only fueled suspicion that Harry had struck closer to the truth than anyone was ready to admit. As trust fractures on every side, Charles is left facing his worst nightmare: the sins of the crown catching up with the youngest heir. Behind locked palace doors, the truth was finally spoken, and it hit like a dagger. The diagnosis the family dreaded for years was now official. But what makes it unbearable isn't just the condition, it's who knew about it and said nothing. The royal silence that once served as a shield had now become a curse. After months of whispers, evasions, and desperate hope, the final word came from a team of specialists brought in under extreme confidentiality. Prince Louis, the youngest face of a future monarchy, had been diagnosed with a rare and progressive neurological disorder. The condition, one not easily named in public, carried implications far beyond physical health. It spoke to future cognition, capacity, and suitability for public life. And the real horror wasn't in the diagnosis alone, but in the realization that it could have been anticipated. Internal medical records previously locked away under royal seal revealed that symptoms had been documented as early as infancy. Delays in motor function, unusual patterns of speech and coordination, changes in behavior that were dismissed as quirks of youth. These weren't recent developments. They were signs, warnings, and one name kept appearing on the old physician memos: Sir Alistair Wyndham King, Charles's longtime private doctor. Allegedly, Wyndham raised red flags more than once, but whether the warnings were ignored or buried remains uncertain. What is clear now is that the cost of inaction has reached its peak. For Catherine, the breaking point came one quiet evening in the nursery. Louis, confused and tired, looked up at her and asked, "Will I be okay, Mummy?" The innocence of the question shattered her. She reportedly collapsed into tears, holding him tightly, unable to answer. It wasn't just maternal heartbreak. It was the unbearable weight of a mother facing a reality she was forced to carry alone for far too long. But this crisis didn't exist in a vacuum. An unsettling piece of the puzzle came from a long-forgotten financial document found in the Queen's restricted archive. Years ago, Queen Elizabeth had quietly set up a private contingency fund. It was earmarked not for succession emergencies, but for future safeguarding of heirs deemed vulnerable. The wording was vague, almost cryptic, but palace insiders now believe it was a financial safety net for precisely this kind of tragedy. What did the late Queen suspect? What did she know? And if that wasn't enough, Parliament had already been brought into the shadows. Select members of the Privy Council were informed confidentially months before the public, due to concerns about constitutional succession. If Prince Louis could no longer fulfill ceremonial or representational roles, where did that leave the line of heirs? The stakes had escalated from personal anguish to national significance. The monarchy wasn't just grieving, it was on the edge of transformation. But just when the nation thought it had heard the worst, an even more tragic twist was quietly emerging from deep within the palace archives. Buried in a sealed drawer, a letter from Princess Diana has just resurfaced, and its contents are impossible to ignore. Because in it, she spoke of her fears for a future grandchild. A child who hadn't even been born yet. And her words read like a prophecy coming to life. It was a routine search that led to the revelation. Catherine, desperately combing through royal files in a restricted wing of Balmoral, was seeking information about Queen Elizabeth's private network of medical specialists, hoping to find someone who had advised the crown discreetly in times of health crises. What she discovered instead was a pale blue envelope, handwritten in Diana's unmistakable script, marked "Not to be opened until necessary." Catherine opened it, and what she read would bring her to tears. Dated 1995, 2 years before Diana's death, the letter carried an unsettling tone. Diana wrote of a haunting feeling that her legacy wouldn't end with her, that a royal child will bear the burden of my silence, and he will carry something the crown will be too proud to admit. There was no name, no gender. But the eerie accuracy of her words sent chills down Catherine's spine. Every line seemed to align with the struggle Louis was now enduring. When Charles was shown the letter, he reportedly turned pale and sat down in stunned silence. He clutched the paper, rereading it multiple times before murmuring, "She saw what none of us could." He hadn't spoken Diana's name aloud in months, not since Louis's health crisis had begun to unravel in public. And now, with this letter, her presence felt more real than ever. The emotional toll was evident. Charles became withdrawn, often slipping away from meetings and spending long hours in the Queen's private library, just sitting in silence with the letter folded in his hand. But the line that struck everyone hardest was this: "There is a sickness within the crown that will return, and when it does, it must not be silenced again." The phrase triggered both awe and fear. Was Diana referring to a metaphorical sickness, an institution unwilling to change, or something far more literal? That line would go on to dominate every private discussion among senior royals for weeks. Strangely, the letter had never been shown to William. It had been stored in a file marked for Charles's eyes only, tucked away beneath layers of bureaucracy and protocol. When William finally read it after Catherine insisted, his reaction was reportedly one of heartbreak and fury. "She tried to warn us," he said, "and we locked her away in history." Camilla, however, was far less moved. Upon hearing that Charles was becoming obsessed with Diana's words, she lashed out. In a private exchange overheard by aides, she accused him of living in ghost stories and letting the past dictate the present. But Charles didn't respond. He simply left the room, the letter still clutched in his trembling hands. But the letter wasn't the only thing from Diana's past to resurface, because her will contained one final instruction about her future grandchildren. Catherine was always seen as the pillar of grace, but everyone has a breaking point. And for the Princess of Wales, it came behind closed doors. When she finally confessed, she could no longer protect her son from the institution itself. The world had long admired her composure. Through scandal, scrutiny, and ceaseless comparisons to Diana, Catherine had maintained the image of the calm royal, the poised mother, the future queen. But beneath that polished exterior, something had been quietly unraveling. The weight of silence, the pressure of tradition, and the cold machinery of the monarchy had worn her down, piece by piece. And then, she broke. It happened in the privacy of her residence, late at night. An emotional outburst, captured on a discreet security feed, showed Catherine in a moment of complete collapse. In the footage later leaked by anonymous palace staff, she could be heard saying, "I can't do this anymore. I can't protect him from all of it." The footage never made it to the press, but it circulated within royal circles, sparking a wave of concern and whispers about whether the Princess of Wales was finally ready to walk away from the firm grip of tradition. What Catherine had been carrying wasn't just the fear of her child's condition, it was the guilt of inaction. She blamed herself for not acting sooner, for allowing Louis to remain in the shadows of duty while doctors whispered warnings behind closed doors. In her despair, she turned to someone unexpected, Princess Anne. Known for her stoicism, Anne became a quiet force of empathy. The two women shared a private lunch, away from prying eyes, where Catherine confessed everything. The sleepless nights, the crushing guilt, the feeling that protocol mattered more than her own child. Anne, in a rare moment of softness, offered more than comfort, she offered truth. She warned Catherine not to trust certain royal aides who had allegedly misled her about treatment options. She also revealed that she too had once fought the crown on a private matter and had been shut down. "They don't protect us," Anne said. "We protect them, and that's the problem." Later that night, Catherine sat alone in Louis's room and wrote him a letter. In it, she poured out every ounce of love and sorrow she had buried for years. One line stood out. "No matter what happens, you are loved. Not as a prince, not as a symbol, but as my son." The letter was folded and placed in a memory box beside his bed. The very next day, she made a decision that shocked the senior royals. Catherine formally requested that Prince Louis be pulled from all future royal duties indefinitely. No public appearances, no ceremonial obligations, no titles to bear in front of cameras. The move was controversial, even polarizing, but she refused to back down. For once, she wasn't acting as the future queen. She was acting as a mother who'd had enough. As Catherine retreats into protective silence, the monarchy faces a chilling ultimatum from a heartbroken father, and it shakes the very concept of royal legacy. King Charles has broken